the functions that make up work are changing. They've always been changing, but they're changing faster than they ever have. And companies' failure to invest in technology as an infrastructure. I find myself saying infrastructure a lot more than ever when I talk to C-level executives. I say, if you want to go from here to here, do you have the foundation to do it?
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic.
Wow, good.
And
you added a few more syllables in there.
Yeah, I was just improving on
there you go.
On the fantastic. I have a question for you.
Sure.
Thinking back to when you were a kid, what was your favorite game?
What was my favorite game? You know, I was a big Super Mario fan. I was also a big Sonic the Hedgehog fan.
Okay.
And then some classic OG board games. I was a big Scrabble fan.
Nice.
What about you?
For video games, Asteroids. This may show a little difference in our age. Asteroids and honestly any driving game, like Grand Prix and Pole Position. I loved the driving games. Those are some of my favorites. And then for board games, I didn't get into Scrabble until I got married. My wife Linda is like a Scrabble champion, so she taught me a lot, and I did beat her one game.
Wow!
But yeah. But I also like, if it doesn't get too competitive, I do like Monopoly as well.
But yes, I have always enjoyed Monopoly, but it's just so long.
It is long.
Yeah.
And
I don't have the patience for Monopoly.
And when you get the super competitive people, it can have a detrimental effect on the game. I'll just say that.
This is true.
Yeah.
Or if you have a banker who's just stealing cash, then that too.
That's right. But do you have any idea why I asked you about your favorite game?
I have no idea. Tell me why you asked.
Okay. Well, before I tell you, I want to ask you another question. Did you learn anything while you were playing these games?
Well, let's see. I learned how to save a princess from a castle. Learned how to beat Mr. Robotnik, Dr. Robotnik. I can't remember the villain's name in Sonic the Hedgehog. I think that there's general skills kind of so like from the video game standpoint, like you usually don't beat a level on the first try. So you kind of figure out and you go through the struggle a little bit to beat it. And every time you lose, every time your character dies, your player dies, you say, all right, I think I know how to get it next time. And maybe you do, maybe you don't. And then you keep trying. And eventually you do sort of work up those muscles to be able to then learn what you need to do to beat that level.
Well, I think you just described sort of the impetus of our guest's company, which is 1Huddle, and our guest is Sam Caucci, who's the founder and CEO. And in this amazing interview, we get to talk a lot about training. We both nerd out a little bit on the concept of training, but his company and his philosophy is really about using games and making things, really where that team member is, and not to completely replace, more traditional learning methods or teaching methods, but really as a combination and using tech sort of as infrastructure to support a lot of other training that organizations do.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that he walks through kind of using games as the vehicle for learning, he talks about the struggle, he talks about the entanglement, talks about the predictability of it, that you should be playing these games and taking these trivia-based quizzes even before the learning happens, even before the training, because all of the science that went into 1Huddle is about really helping to retain that information and very much making it stick.
Absolutely. And, you think about those games that we talked about, right? Those are games that we want to play over and over again. Well, I don't know about you, but I want to play Asteroids all day long. I want to play those driving games so often. And when you think about how we often approach a workforce, it's about, here's the standard, here's what you're supposed to do. If you don't do it, we'll slap your hand. But it really uses the positive reinforcement approach and, some healthy competition to get people really engaged. And I really liked what he said, too, about how this can be a great tool for leaders to find opportunities, additional opportunities to coach their team. So it's not about separating the leadership and the tech. It's about really bringing them together with the power of unity, as Sam likes to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say let's get straight to this interview with Sam Caucci. Hey, Sam, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. We're really excited about our conversation today. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Matt.
Absolutely. So Sam, to kick this off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as well as tell us about 1Huddle?
Sure. 1Huddle is a technology startup. We're about 5 years old. I still use the term startup because I think it's fun to say. I don't know when we officially stop becoming a startup, but I'm going to keep saying it. We turn workforce training into mobile games is sort of the core idea at 1Huddle. So anything you need to know to perform at work, whether it's day one onboarding or day 365 continuous development, you can do it all on 1Huddle through our quick burst game platform. And we've been having a lot of fun. It's obviously workforce training, development. Lifting workers up is a very important topic right now. And we're excited and having a lot of fun with what we're doing.
So, Sam, can you kind of take us back and let us know kind of how this came about, right? Where did the idea come from this, and kind of what's your background to lead to this?
Sure. I'm from South Florida. I moved to New Jersey for the weather. And our offices now we're based in beautiful Newark, New Jersey. My career started in the sports industry. Actually, had signed to play football at the University of Alabama. Right about after that, I had to kind of get to work right away. And when I did, I had the opportunity to work in sales and business development for a early stage sports training and performance company. So think NFL draft for any sports fans out there. If you're a pro athlete rising out of college, preparing for the NFL combine, or a Major League Baseball player in the offseason, you have to stay game ready year round. And we had a training facility in South Florida that did everything from speed and agility to nutrition, to physical therapy, to skill development. And we had 6 strength coaches that had more letters after the name than you could imagine. They were really sharp, knew what they were doing. And I had the responsibility of marketing our programs and selling to sports agents and pro athletes. So I got my background, my upbringing. I spent about a decade in the sports industry doing that. I worked in, Miami. I moved to the Northeast to work with the same type of business concept in the franchising industry, and went from kind of a single location concept to doing this for 100 sports performance franchises all over the globe with a company called the Parisi Speed School. And it was sort of there, guys, that I started to realize as I was traveling to all of these different small businesses that sales, development, employee training was a real challenge. And the way that organizations were tackling it was kind of like putting you back in the classroom. It was manuals, it was e-learning videos, it was, PowerPoint, it was tests and pop quizzes. And I didn't think it wasn't so much I had I disagreed with the medium is it felt like it wasn't effective. It felt like it was getting harder and harder to get a new hire out of college skilled up to be customer facing, delivering on service standards, selling or talking and negotiating with a customer. And I share that background because when I started 1Huddle, my idea wasn't too far removed from what we were doing as strength coaches. It was just how do we make a employee respond to a customer just a tenth of a second faster? How do we help them perform at the level they need to and the brand wants them to, and get them there as quickly and safely as possible? So, I came from the sports fitness world. I'm now doing, kind of workforce development, but there's a lot of parallels to, to what I was doing in both roles.
And just curious about the name 1Huddle. Did that come from the sports side? I guess kind of when you think huddle, you think football. Is there a connection there?
One of the things I learned, we weren't 1Huddle when we started. The company was called Sales Huddle. We still had the term huddle. The idea was around, when you come together and you challenge each other, you get better. So the idea of a huddle, I think, is really powerful. It's obviously known in business circles. It's known in sports. But we changed about 2 years into what we were doing. We started the company in the Bay Area, like any, good young tech company. We did our tour of duty of sorts. And then when we came back to New York, I landed in Newark. And when we landed in Newark, we started to see the way our product was being used inside of organizations. And one of the shocking things was that individuals that were getting access to what we were doing were predominantly the people in the company that get access to everything. It was senior leadership, it was management, it was young people that already had a 4-year degree. And one of the things we think there's tremendous opportunity for, especially in the traction space and entertainment and hospitality, is these are environments with heavy frontline workforces where people have to get skilled up quickly. Information changes rapidly. It doesn't make any sense that we don't give the same learning opportunity to the front line. And we saw that again on the ground, being in Newark, a great American city that is fighting back and fighting through all types of stuff post recession, post pandemic. And we said, shifting from Sales Huddle to 1Huddle was all about the power of unity. It was about the power of the number one. There's no other number that in one hand can mean, competing to be the best. And in the other hand, mean, being together. So that was the mindset behind the shift to the number 1Huddle. And we talk a lot at 1Huddle about an organization being only as strong as every worker.
So Sam, if I could dive into kind of some training nerd stuff, can we talk a little bit about how the platform works? So is this your content? Is it the content of the organization? Who's putting together, I guess, the quizzes or the flow of the information? So could you kind of walk us through that piece as well?
Sure. Yeah, we think that one of the things I learned being a manager and being in a position to train and develop people was that the content's always changing. And what you do on day one may be your standard deck and presentation, but especially in a entertainment or a hospitality environment or a retail environment, 365 days a year, one of our clients is Madison Square Garden. That is a different venue, literally 300 and I don't know, maybe 30 of those days, maybe even more than that. Every night, it's a different singer, it's a different sporting event, it's a different attraction. And so that using that as the backdrop to why we built the product the way we did, we said we wanted to build something that could change really rapidly, which means that the problem we saw today inside of most organizations is that the person that is the only person allowed to change, edit, modify, create, buy content is usually this person in the training role or learning and development or operations. And you know what? I love them. We work with them, but there's only a few of them. Might be only one of them. And you think about the U.S. workforce. We got 165 million U.S. workers. There's only 35,000 people in learning and development. So, I think there's a heck of a lot more opportunity to tap in to the best practices that our frontline workers see every day when they interact and engage and greet guests and answer questions and deliver service. So the answer to your question, Matt, is that games can be built two different ways on 1Huddle. It can be built bottom up, kind of crowdsourcing from the front line, where the organization wants, they can look at questions coming from their team members and sort of swipe right to accept it and put it into their game library, or swipe left and give feedback. But it can also come the traditional top down, where a manager or a training leader can build a game in minutes on our platform. And I know I'm saying game a lot, and people have all types of ideas what I mean by game. Is it, is this Fortnite, or is this, Tetris or Pac-Man? Or so the game is like quick burst trivia, because we found that the number one format of game still to this day is trivia. Crosses every generation. My mom, my daughter, they all get it. So when we built the game, we didn't want the learning curve to be steep for a certain segment of the workforce. So imagine a 10, 15, 25 question, multiple choice, true, false, image, all types of quick formats. That's the game. Anybody can build a game like that because of the way that we built the kind of authoring tool. We wanted it to be not intimidating. It's intimidating to build a PowerPoint deck. It's intimidating to record a video and get it in the market. It's not intimidating to suggest what, a question may be about, a special beverage that, the restaurant is offering. So we wanted authoring to be really rapid from the front line.
Mm. Would love to go even deeper of the importance of the training being delivered through the vehicle of games, and particularly, how do games themselves influence learning? Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. The science is pretty wild when you get into it, and it sounds like you guys are especially, we want to get wonky, we can get wonky. This is what I started when we built the product. I wasn't actually thinking about a game. I spent, a year or two reading everything I could get my hands on around how do you improve skill. I was reading, I was putting my hands on books behind the 10,000 hour rule that Malcolm Gladwell made famous, but I read the research that, he found. I read books by Carol Dweck on mindset, talking about growth mindset versus fixed mindset. I read books about fundamental science of learning. What is myelin? How does the brain actually build a skill? I read parenting books, which really freaked out my girlfriend at the time. She was wondering why the heck I was reading, a stack of six parenting books. But again, I went down a rabbit hole, and there were three fundamentals that I found were critical for learning to stick. And the first was this concept called retrieval practice, which in a nutshell, the research shows that the testing effect, testing somebody on something, leads to stronger, longer lasting retention. And which kind of means the learning's got to be hard, which if we all think about it, if you use a fitness example, if you go to the gym every day and put the same weight on the bar and do the same workout, you're eventually going to what? You're going to plateau. So struggle and challenge was one ingredient that has to be present. And testing, pop quizzing, trivia is a great way to do that. Second ingredient is this concept called entanglement. You have to do a few things. You have to space material. So I don't know about you guys, but when I was in school, I used to kind of cram that last, the night before, maybe minutes before the test. And we all know what happens the next day. You forget most of it. Research shows you forget 70% of what you learn within 3 days, 87% within 30. So I kept reading all this stuff on forgetting curve. And the second point is, if you test somebody on content or you study something, you shouldn't do it all. It shouldn't be crammed. It shouldn't be an event. You should do a little bit on day 1, a little bit on day 3, a little bit on day 7, 15, 30, 60, 90. So, and there's a spacing effect that makes the content more accessible, but you have to space material. You also have to interleave content is what it's called, which means Don't go testing people on chapter 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4 and then 5. Test them on chapter 1, a little bit of 3 and a little bit of 10. And then next week, chapter 2, with a little bit of chapter 1 and a little bit of chapter 8. Because forcing the brain to discriminate against content makes it harder. So here's an example. If I'm training a new frontline guest service team member, I should be not just putting them through a training on this specific task. I should be putting them through a little bit of maybe DEI content peppered in with a little bit of stuff from their day one, a little bit of mission vision content. So that's sort of the second ingredient. You got to entangle the learner with the information that they're not ready for, and you got to space it out. The third is the most fun one. It's called predictive. The act of guessing at something you don't know the answer to is something that some people call generative learning, where you don't know the answer, but you're going to guess at it. That function is one of the most powerful learning mechanics to employ, and it's the most uncommon today because the way that a lot of folks teach is a reflection of the way they were taught in school. And you would never quiz somebody on something before the lecture. But again, the research proves that if you test somebody on the material before they've seen it and you let them predict. So if I roll out a pop quiz 7 days before onboarding, you've never seen onboarding. That essentially will set people up for better retention. So those were the three ingredients that had to be present. And I said, to your question, Josh, nobody wants to be pop quizzed. Who wants to get a test? I mean, we're talking about young people who are carrying all types of college loan debt, people who have PTSD from going to school. They don't want to get pop quizzed on material. What is something that you're okay failing at? What's something that as you struggle, you want to come back for more? What's something, again, you know where I'm going, right? That's a little bit right, but it's a game. And so that's what we did. We said, Josh, let's wrap these like really powerful learning mechanics in a game. And to the player, the worker, I'm trying to beat Donna. I'm trying to beat Mike. I'm trying to beat Rose. I'm trying to rise the leaderboard. But in the process, there's really powerful learning mechanics happening under the surface.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Sam, especially those three elements. And, you know, I look back at training that I do, obviously without the 1Huddle on maybe soon I will, who knows? But, you know, I think about those struggle components and getting people to really think about things. And I like the word you use there, entanglement, right? You know, it's like this puzzle that they have to kind of unwind and kind of figure through. And that's really what kind of helps people process and also internalize and personalize, which I think is really important. I think my question, though, as you talked about those elements, is when you go to an organization and you talk to them about all these things that 1Huddle can help them do, which one of those do you get most pushback on? Or are there ones that like, oh, we don't really need to do that? You know, that kind of thing. I'm curious from your standpoint, what do you see there?
There is a lot of what I would call a neuromyth about how learning actually works that we deal with every day when we are either selling our product or coaching a manager who's using 1Huddle. And of the three, the one that is the most tough for people to initially wrap their head around is that learning by playing, you know, kind of the absence of, I'll get this question a lot. Don't they have to learn it before they play it? Hey, Matt, don't I have to read it before I can be, and that, so we get a lot of, you know, confused looks when people think that, you know, learning, the act of learning something happens in this very specific way of you have to sit through the lecture. And then now that you've learned it, 1Huddle or a game or reinforcement can happen. So, you know, we spend a lot of time trying to educate on that one, but that's definitely the biggest one that people raise their eyebrows at. But it also, I don't know about you guys, but I never took a class in school on how to learn. And, you know, if you think about our workforce today, as the speed of jobs, like the functions that make up work are going to change, and they've been changing, but they're going to continue to change at really rapid rates. Companies are going to need to cross-skill workers for not just their current job, but who knows what the next job is. I was just with a brand in California that invested in a hamburger robot that makes and flips 240 hamburgers an hour. So I think the job of whoever's in the back of house is going to change a little bit. Yeah. So it comes back to this point that organizations need to be learning environments where they educate not just themselves, but their people about how to learn so that they can employ better practices on the job as they skill up for whatever the next job looks like.
So I think what's interesting here, one of the takeaways that I'm getting is for the longest time, or a lot of people, hold belief that content is king, right? When we're talking about what is the training material that is being delivered. And from everything that you're saying here is that the delivery is king, is that the content can be absolutely stellar. It can be absolutely phenomenal, but if it doesn't incorporate those keys to making it stick, that variation, that entanglement, the struggle, the predictiveness, the competitiveness of it, then the content doesn't even matter, because you talk about how much is not retained kind of in the days after learning the content. So is that, I would say, kind of is that a message that people should really be thinking of? If it's not just that the content needs to be superior, it's truly about the way in which that content is delivered.
I'll say yes, but I'll add to it, because I think there's another way to look at this that's helpful. Because content, there is a clear difference, and you gentlemen know this. There's a clear difference between good content, bad content. I mean, there are good practices and there are bad practices, and so the reality, though, is I don't think we have so much of a content problem. And, I travel to a lot of trade shows and events and conferences, and I hear there's a lot of organizations that are in the business of selling, content or best practice. And I think that, again, putting aside a little bit, because, again, there is a difference between quality, absolutely. However, I think that when you're watching the news cycle right now and you're hearing what's happening around, great resignation, we're all tired of that one. Now it's the boss loss, where 3 and 4 managers are burned out because they're doing the frontline workers' work and they're ready to shift. Gallup just had a study that came out in early August that said less than 1 in 4 workers believe that their managers have their best interests in mind personally. So we have this situation where team members, employees are concerned about if people are listening to them. And I think that this is where technology can be really powerful, because even if the worker proposes a game question on 1Huddle that's not correct, that's an opportunity for me as a leader to engage that person. I mean, the fact that a frontline worker took a second to build a question about their job for somebody else that they did not have to do, it is very interesting to me. And I think that that's where we should be, whether we're using 1Huddle or any other technology, or survey or pen and paper, creating an environment where you can access what your frontline people are saying and saying, so that you can then turn around and coach. I was a football coach coming up while I was working, and I used to say in the early days, you could just say to people, run these sprints because I said so, and they would do it. That doesn't work anymore. I have to explain, a little bit about why we're doing this. Why are we changing the way we're performing? Because the business landscape is X, Y, or Z. And I think that that's what I'm saying, where the content can actually be more valuable as long as it's framed the right way. And weigh-in gets buy-in, as that old management mantra says. So I think that creating an environment where your team members can communicate back to you is going to be critical for high-performing organizations.
So, Sam, I got to say, when I was doing ladder sprints, playing football in high school, nobody ever told me why. They just said, do it. So I understand where you're coming from.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly. But you mentioned something there that I think is really, really critical, because you talked about leader engagement. And one of the things I've seen with various organizations is they think that tech is taking over, and they're almost letting it. Like, here, you've got the technology now, it's hands off for the management team. But the way you mentioned it is that gives you an opportunity, when you see what someone is putting in there, to coach or to engage with them. So can you talk a little bit about that relationship and how it's, the tech may be really cool and really effective, but there's still the human element that has to be part of that process?
Sure. I mean, it's a very thin line, depending on, the technology and the job role that we're talking about. There are a few realities I've seen across every vertical. The functions that make up work are changing. They've always been changing, but they're changing faster than they ever have. And companies' failure to invest in technology as an infrastructure. I find myself saying infrastructure a lot more than ever when I talk to C-level executives. I say, if you want to go from here to here, do you have the foundation to do it? And part of that is the technology foundation to do it. And that's not just your point of sale system or your CRM or your billing platform or your ops systems, but it's also how you communicate learning and engage workers and communicate. So I believe that the fact that technology is being adopted to automate repetitive tasks, which my opinion is, everybody's on all sides of this. The reality is certain functions are going to get straight up automated. There's just too much firepower in the tech space that's coming after those jobs. And as that happens, it means that we need a lot of support from leaders and organizations that understand that the employee experience is paramount. If you don't have great employee experience, you don't have great customer experience, which means they have to take care about what the next job is. And that's kind of why I said we got to be really good at cross-training. The person that's in back of house, there's no reason we can't use technology to offer them opportunities to learn the front of house roles or to learn whatever the next job is. And some organizations are going to do the right thing and some aren't. So I think that we're living in a moment where workers are talking a little bit more loudly. They have technology allows them to amplify their voice. And I can't predict where that's going to go, but I would imagine, I read something the other day talking about the number one way the Gen Z workers find work. The number one way a Gen Z worker is finding their next job is through employee referral. If your employees if I'm asking my friend about, hey, can you make an introduction? I'd love to work at where you work. And that person says, nah, you don't want to work here. You're never going to know if you're not caring about your workers first. So I think this is an interesting moment where the best organizations are going to listen. They're going to continue to invest. They're going to use technology to create learning opportunities. And the other ones that have figured out they can't handle people, it'll be very easy to spot those in the market.
Yeah. What about those that say that things like learning and training should be a low-tech solution? Those that are big advocates or that have really seen success from the classroom style training and really role-playing and collaborative and people interacting together. And I suppose is a little bit playing devil's advocate, but as far as responding to those to say, well, actually doing it online, doing it game-based, can actually be more effective than doing it role play and kind of in-person collaboratively.
Sure. I think training is not an either or, it's an and. And if I was building a strength and conditioning facility for my team, I wouldn't just have it full of treadmills. So I would have all types of modalities and I would be skilling my people up from all types of angles. So, I think the answer is you should be doing both. You should be leveraging both. I would say that this is what I say to organizations that talk a lot about live training. And I say, you're doing probably the hard stuff, which is good because knowledge is the foundation of any skill. I mean, we work with fighter pilots in the Air Force on our platform. We work with first responders that use us for medical safety training. We work with sales reps in Madison Square Garden. We're working with guest services team members in hospitality. So regardless of the function, you got to know the functions of the skill in the role before you can then act on it. So I think that's really important. And I think that, some organizations, like you said, Josh, that are leaning into on-the-job training, hands-on, they're booking the time to do classroom, and they're paying their workers to be on the clock for that training, which we know is a major challenge today. They're gonna invest and put their money where their mouth is around that. When the ones that do that, I think they're doing the hardest part, and I would compliment them for doing it. The reality, though, is, like we said, we have to use technology to kind of half charge the battery. Imagine if we could half charge the battery before the live training. Imagine if you come into the live training and we're doing role plays on service situations, and you already know, the right format, the right acronym, the right system, the right script put to memory that you can act upon in that live situation. I think that's where technology, regardless of what it is, can be really powerful. It's got to meet people where they are as well. I think this is a big issue today, and this is a government, not to talk government for a second, but we have labor rules today that were written before the internet was created that say certain job training is a worker cannot do voluntarily. Even if it's completely voluntary and it's skill-based and it's transferable and they can take it wherever they want, even if they are not allowed to do it because of some ancient regulation that's in labor rules that were written at a time to protect workers and now are holding them back. And they're holding back our most vulnerable frontline workers from learning opportunities. So that's I think there's one of the challenges with technology today is the people that are using it are generally the ones who get access to everything. And I think this is where there's need for change and need for reform. There's a lot of great companies in the market that are investing in technology, and then there's ones who are I'll say the other thing, there are ones that are saying, we don't want to invest in technology because of legal exposure, and some of them it's a little bit of a cop out. Some of them are hiding behind labor rules so they don't have to invest in technology. So it's a very fast changing pace. I think COVID accelerated us a decade. I think that it has accelerated what technology is going to be available around workforce development, because of a lot of stuff that shook out.
Sam, it's really interesting as you talk about those labor laws, because there was a time maybe 15 years ago or so that I started sending out via email just an informational newsletter to people that had come to, sessions that I had done within this organization I was working with, and kind of got my hand slapped because they're getting it at home. And if they're reading it at home, then we have to pay them for their time, and so I totally understand what you're talking about, where the laws have not caught up to what we're able to do and what the learners may actually want. Right. So I think there's a disconnect there. But before we started recording, we also talked a little bit about the fact that so many places, and maybe this is, a good segue from Josh's last question, but so many places are looking to speed up the training process, right? And we know that humans can only learn at a certain pace, right? But having that tech as an infrastructure and, doing those things maybe ahead of time before they get in the classroom, and that's when they do the role play. And now we can actually have a deeper conversation about it because you've got this information ahead of time. Is that something that can help organizations, for lack of a better term, speed up the training so that they can get out and be on the floor or be in the attraction and be productive that much faster?
I would say that there are all types of really cool emerging technologies focused on the learning and training and upskilling category, coaching and mentoring now as well. And the ones that I think I would be looking at as a business owner are the ones that can get me from 0 to 60 faster, like you all say. And the key, though, is obviously to do it safely and to do it in a way that actually, has some foundation and works. And onboarding, the cost of onboarding a new hire, we can do that quicker and more effectively the dollars companies invest in onboarding, they always will tell you, a CEO will always tell you, that's money they never get back. It is just a fixed amount of time. It takes us 60 days to get this person from, 0 to maybe not even 100%, maybe just 85, 86% is enough, and then they can hit the floor. So I think that it's definitely in our mind at 1Huddle. When we build our tool, we think about speed. We think about how fast to create, how long is a game? How long does a game make sense for a worker? Even though maybe 20 minutes are better than 10 minutes, if we're working with a worker who only has 3 to 5 minutes to get a game in, we got to figure out a way how to make those 3 to 5 minutes the most impactful to be, we talk a lot on our engineering side about, looking at the game from the point of view of the player. I think that there's just too many technologies in learning that don't care about the learner's experience because they've just had it in this format for so long. I mean, I'm pretty confident that a lot of the Blackboards of the world don't care about what the college student thinks because they have a monopoly on the fact that this is the learning tool that the school is going to use. And we're going through this moment of time where, if you want workers to really engage, continuously develop around the edges of work, you have to care about them almost like you care about them as a customer or a consumer. But here's like a crazy thought. Imagine if you looked at your workers like they were a customer. What decisions would you be making? Imagine if instead of saying you have to do this compliance training this week, Josh, you have to do it, it's required. If you don't do it, you can't show up. What if we flipped that and said, you know what, Josh, it's voluntary, okay? But we're going to put a big leaderboard up. We're going to give you a lot of resources. We're going to give you a lot of space. We're going to make the experience really fun. And we're going to incentivize We're going to incentivize the experience. Leverage gaming mechanics in order to get you to want to do it. Inspire you to action versus just tell you you have to do it. And again, I think that's where there's a changing of the guard. There's a transition happening inside of organizational cultures and how they bring about change and gain buy-in.
Sam, one thing that I'm thinking about here, kind of just over the course of this conversation, is we're talking about this very much from the lens of workforce and from labor and from employees, and even more specifically within the attractions industry, within hospitality. But I've got to imagine that you probably think about other applications of this as well. Like with everything that we're talking about here, could this be the future of school? Could this be grade school education? Could this be college, university? Could this, well, you mentioned parenting earlier. I'll bring that up now. Could parents use this? Does this go beyond workforce training?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the mindset, and I found myself, I have a 5-year-old daughter now, so I find myself employing, some of the tactics that, I've been reading about and, sort of productizing to the ones that made sense. And there's a real power to play. Like, play is not trivial. And if you look into the history of human evolution, or the history of how you journey through adolescence, the most powerful experiences you have come from trying things and reaching for things and falling off the tree and and it's a very natural instinct, and it's how you learn it. Inside of a classroom when you are growing up. It's just somewhere along the line we decided to put you in a seat and hand you a book and start talking to you. And I think that learning and development is very early in the game. I mean, the learning management system has only been around for 15, 20 years, maybe. In the history of work, even if you go back 1,500, 2,000 years, this is a very short amount of time that we've been looking at using technology as part of this process. So we always try to advocate inside of organizations when we get companies who will say to us, what can you learn in a game? Or our stuff's too serious for that. We don't want it to be a game. We're teaching people how to make palomas. That's serious stuff. We don't want them to play a game on it. I said, well, it's really cool. Like I'm standing at your restaurant right now. You have this like employee loyalty program. It's like, yeah, we turned our how to be a customer into this like really fun game where you like, oh, okay, got it. But learning how to be a bartender, that's this checklist that you have. That makes sense. So, like I said, I think that we're in this state where do unto others as it was done unto you. Like I had to go through that, so now you have to go through that a little bit. And we have a quote on the wall here at 1Huddle. It says, "Some get it, some won't." It's just, and we work every day to try to get people to open up to what the power of play is in competition.
Sam, that reminds me of a book that my dad gave me, I don't know, 30 years ago or something. And it talked about in the very beginning, like the first story was about these people and what they had to do. And it was about that there was these certain things and they had to put them on their side and they, all these different things. And they had to do it over and over again. But people were lining up to do it. And they were actually talking about bowling, but the way they described it at first, it sounded like a job. They were very clever in how they wrote it. But then when you say, oh, it's bowling, of course, it's a game. It's fun. People are lining up for it. So I totally, what you were just saying there really resonates with me as well. But I'm curious, as you've implemented these things, what are the specific measurables that you look to say, this is working? This is, maybe more effective than older methods.
Sure. There's, we have a lot of the kind of base mechanics we're always looking at, games played, minutes of play per player per game. We're looking at something we call a contest win, where every week you can create a contest, which is kind of like a fantasy sports tournament. You can wrap a set of users around a series of games and create a leaderboard, let everybody get a certain number of attempts, and it again has a start date and an end date. So number of contest wins by player is something that we look at. The most advanced mechanic we have, though, that's probably the most important, is we have a metric called win rate. And win rate is kind of like your NPS score as a learner. And what win rate is telling you is based off of and let's just take a specific series of games. You can take a series of games based off all your gameplay on these games. Based off your last performance, less how much time has passed, how many times you played it, it will give you a score from 0 to 100 that tells you how well you know the content. And the cool thing about the number is it's kind of like it decays. So 3 months from now, if you're an 80 on the onboarding content, you may be a 50. And once you fall into a certain zone, it starts flashing at the manager. Once you stop playing, it starts flashing more. So 2 observations. One, I think managers, this is where tech can help managers. Managers really struggle to know what to train next. So it's a guessing game a little bit, right? You got 10 employees and you don't know, you kind of know where everybody struggles, but you don't know specifically what content they're struggling with. So with 1Huddle in this mechanic, it'll tell you by player, by department, by location, how are your people doing on your most important games? And as things start to slip, you can either turn it on autopilot and our games will sort of fill the gap and rise it back up. You can look at it by player as well. So it's, on one hand, this mechanic to help you know what your people know in real time. The second thing is it's a really powerful indicator of flight risk. Because if you have a player who has played 80% of their games week over week for the last 6 months, and all of a sudden that they go to 0 for a few weeks, anybody hearing all this talk about the quiet quitting? Well, we can very clearly see who is quitting and who is starting to check out. And again, this comes back to just another area of the business that operations can tap into to, be predictive, to forecast where do workers need to close a gap quicker so that we don't have more service situations or we drive more revenue. And also, hey, maybe somebody's coming a little bit disconnected and hey, manager, maybe that's someone you should go talk to.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's something related to mental health. Maybe it's they're just having a bad few weeks. Maybe they're aggravated about something. And this is where technology can augment, not replace humans. Managers, like the best managers are leaders, and the best leaders are coaches. And coaches have the skill of inspiring learning in their people. And we think in today's workforce, we need more coaches, and coaches take a lot of inputs and they spend their time trying to communicate with their people why we do things, motivate them to want to do it. If they create that environment, it's amazing what can happen with your people. And if you don't, game over.
Sam, this has been absolutely a phenomenal conversation. We really appreciate the opportunity to share your time with us. As we start to wind this down here, if people want to learn more about 1Huddle, or if they want to get a hold of you directly, where would you send them?
Sure, thanks. And it's been fun. If anybody's interested in learning more, you can head on over to 1huddle.co. That's the number 1huddle.co. Check out more. We got all types of stuff on there to try to shake up how you think about learning.
Absolutely. So Sam, like Josh said, it's been a great conversation. Any kind of last thoughts for people out there who are, maybe they're listening to this and they're like, oh, yeah, I kind of am stuck in my training rut. Like, what would you say to folks like that?
I would say keep your feet moving. I would say that it's the start that stops most people. And when it comes to training and development, especially today, I would say, continue to sharpen the saw, continue to work at getting people at making sure that the things you've built are updated. Continue to look at what you've built and rebuild it. Continue to talk to your people and ask them what they want to learn next. I mean, when was the last time you asked an employee, hey, you just went through training, what's something we missed 6 months ago that would have been really helpful for you, that we should go back and put in for the next person? And the last thing I would add to that is, a workforce is only as strong as every worker. And if you're not fundamentally given the same learning opportunities to the frontline worker that's making $15 an hour that you are to the $150,000 a year person in the other corner, you are creating an environment where you are not going to tap into the full potential of your people. And that is what I think the future of work is really all about. It's about people.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so one final question for you here. And what are the games that have changed your life personally?
Yeah, a lot of friendships playing NCAA growing up on PlayStation. A lot of battles, playing games. Listen, I think that it's interesting. I did a talk where I talked about the kind of different games and different stages. When I was growing up, I grew up in an Italian-American family, and we'd go to dinner and they'd put, $5 for the quarters on the table, and I'd play Pac-Man, and I'd sit there and I'd watch people come and go, and I'd play Pac-Man. And you know what? I never beat that game, and I always came back, and I always sat down, and I had a interesting experience insofar as, we just grew up in South Florida, and the folks that came to the restaurant I was at were, it was always a packed restaurant. We'd come once a week, and someone would always sit down. It was like one of these old school Pac-Man machines where you had, someone could sit across from you. If you remember, you can kind of play against each other. And when I think back to that experience, I never think about me sitting there playing alone. I always think about somebody just sitting down, someone who I didn't know. I don't know anything more than that, other than just the friendly competition that occurred. And I think that's something that's something that I think about a lot when we built 1Huddle, is how do we create an environment with friendly competition where people can get to learn each other and connect with people. Again, I come back to this story, the back of house worker who doesn't know what's happening in the front of the house, but can now beat the person on the leaderboard in the front of the house. So that's what's fun for me.
Awesome, Sam. Well, thanks again for your time. This has been great. And for everybody out there who's watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros. Thanks for listening to the Attraction Pros podcast.
Make sure to subscribe so you can tune in when new episodes release, and even better, please leave us a review on iTunes.
For more information, visit attractionpros.com.